On September the 11th, 2001, the world watched as nearly 3,000 people were killed. Yet 3 years on, millions claim there's another story, that the US government conspired to make 9/11 happen.
I don't believe anybody believes this act of terrorism was carried out solely by Arab terrorists.
We really believe that this government was involved in this complicity of 9/11.
They've got blood on their hands.
This film is about the 9/11 conspiracy theories. Fact or fiction, the questions they pose have revealed some extraordinary truths. Ellen Mariani lost her husband, Louis Neil Mariani, on 9/11, but she doesn't blame Al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden. On the morning of the attacks, she and her husband were taking different flights from Boston's Logan Airport to her daughter's wedding in Los Angeles.
He kissed me then, and he says, "I love you, honey. I'll see you 3 minutes after your plane arrives, mine arrives." And I said, okay. And he disappeared. And he was gone.
As she changed planes in Chicago, Ellen Mariani's connecting flight was grounded. So she phoned her daughter.
She was, "Where are you?" And I said, "What's the matter with you?" And she said, "No, where are you? Are you all right?" And I said, "I'm at the terminal in Chicago. Something's wrong with my plane, so it's not coming in. Go over to Neil's United Airline terminal and pick him up." She said, no, there's something wrong with Neil's plane. So I hung up on her and I said to somebody, "Would you go find out what she's talking about?" And he stared at me, he couldn't talk. "What happened? What is going on? What did you find out?" And he said, "Your husband's plane crashed."
Louis Neil Mariani was on United Flight 175. He and 55 other passengers were killed instantly.
Well, at first, I believed it was terrorists. And then I also thought, wait a minute, what's happened to our defense system? That was the first thing that hit me. And that's when I started to really feel that there was a question there. I want to know how my husband died and why he died, and why he wasn't protected.
Ellen Mariani contacted me, and she said, "I need a lawyer with guts because I want one thing." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "Not the money they've been offering, because that's to shut me up. I want the truth."
Ellen Mariani is going to court because she believes her husband is a victim of the biggest government conspiracy in US history, and she's not alone.
When I see the images of 9/11, it raises the question in my mind, is this event, which became the basis for this famous worldwide war on terror, was it itself the ultimate act of terrorism, of state terrorism, in modern times?
The thousands of images from 9/11 also started a process of questioning that has created some remarkable assertions. A worldwide distrust of government motives has been given expression on the internet and credibility in books and newspapers. Millions now believe that a corrupt clique in the Bush administration, together with some of America's allies abroad, conspired to ensure the attacks happened.
It is a very horrendous thought for me as an American to think that my own government might have carried out this kind of attack. And yet the story that we have been given by the White House, by the Pentagon, by the FBI, and now by the 9/11 Commission does not make sense.
David Ray Griffin is a respected theology professor, but his latest book chronicles the conspiracy theories that have grown up around 9/11.
The basic question that has been raised by skeptics of the official theory about 9/11 is whether the attacks were permitted or indeed even engineered by the Bush administration in order to carry out an agenda that it already had on the books.
And here is that agenda, the military mission statement of a right-wing think tank, the Project for the New American Century. Written a year before 9/11, it's supported by key members of the current Bush administration.
The drafting was supervised by Cheney, by Donald Rumsfeld, by Paul Wolfowitz, by Jeb Bush, who's the president's younger brother, and by Lewis Libby, who's Cheney's chief of staff. This is about control over Middle East oil. It indicates that America is aiming for global leadership, both military and economically, and what it says, I think, is chilling. It says if we are going to transform America into tomorrow's dominant force, that's their phrase, then it's going to be a long process unless there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like Pearl Harbor.
Former British government minister Michael Meacher believes the US government could have stopped 9/11 if it had heeded the numerous intelligence warnings.
It is certainly not part of my thinking about this that the American government planned this. I think that is going far too far, but they certainly failed to take necessary efforts to prevent it. If 9/11 hadn't happened, are we to believe that the Bush administration would have been able to launch the war in Iraq and Afghanistan? I very much doubt it.
Through the tears of sadness, I see an opportunity. Make no mistake about it, this nation is sad. But we're also tough and resolute. And now's an opportunity to do generations a favor by coming together and whipping terrorism.
Ellen Mariani has become a hero to those who feel that the US government let 9/11 happen, or even planned it. Using anti-racketeering laws passed in the 70s to combat the mafia, she's taking the Bush administration to court.
It's our position that there's a mob in the White House. Now, we know this is serious allegations, and it's very hard for the American public to want to accept the fact that their government would be involved in something as outrageous as this, the murdering of people. But we allege that the Bush administration had foreknowledge, they failed to warn, they failed to prevent, and since then there's been a massive cover-up.
Ellen Mariani's legal case centres on the first of the conspiracy theories that swirl round 9/11, that the president and his co-conspirators stood down American air defences to let the attacks happen. How else could 4 hijacked planes fly unchallenged in American airspace for an hour and 47 minutes?
67 times in the year before 9/11-01, planes were off course and fighter jets responded. So where were the fighter jets on 9/11? It's more than incompetence, it's criminal.
Where were they that day? My husband was 4 years in the Air Force. Where were his people? He protected our country. And when it came down to 9/11, 2001, nobody was protecting him. Do I feel that the government deliberately did this in our country where our loved ones were killed? Yes.
3 years on, the failures of the Federal Aviation Administration and NORAD, the North Atlantic Air Defense, make millions of people suspect conspiracy.
For some mysterious reason that day, everything broke down, the communication between the FAA and NORAD, and then NORAD responded very slowly, and then the fighter pilots responded very slowly, and you had all of these coincidences of great incompetence that day. The conspiracy theory is that it was stand down. If a stand down order were given, it probably would have to come from at least as high as the vice president.
I am not a conspiracy theorist. It's very easy, with a case like this, to believe in a conspiracy. My instinct is to resist that and to look at the facts and find a more plausible, perhaps a more prosaic explanation. But it is pretty difficult. Given that this protocol existed, whereby fighter aircraft are put into the air as soon as commercial airliners go off course to any significant degree, how can that not have happened?
In November 2002, the independent 9/11 Commission was established to take on the stand-down question and others. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans, including John Lehman, Ronald Reagan's former Navy Secretary, filed their final report this summer.
We set out from the beginning to do our best to make these kinds of urban myths much more difficult by doing everything in the open.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
We had 19 days of public hearings.
I do. Thank you very much, sir.
Every rumor that circulated on the World Wide Web, we have examined, and they've been pouring in from the very beginning. And many of them have proved very useful leads, and we've run them all to ground.
In the process, the Commission has uncovered disturbing evidence of just how vulnerable America was to attack on 9/11. Intelligence warnings about Al-Qaeda were ignored. Lax airport security let armed hijackers board planes. Air traffic and defense systems were totally unprepared for suicide attacks using passenger planes as guided missiles. The following exchange took place between Boston Air Traffic Control and the military as the first plane approached Manhattan.
All right, Boston Center, Team U. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
America's defenses assumed the hijackers would want to survive, but they were wrong. A later exchange is between 2 controllers running New York's airspace as the second plane veered off course.
Got somebody who keeps coasting, but it looks like he's going into one of the small airports down there. So trying to bring him up. Do you know who he is? We don't know who he is. We're just picking him up now. All right, heads up, man. It looks like another one. All right.
Even after the third plane hit the Pentagon, senior air traffic managers faltered.
Do we want to think about scrambling aircraft?
Oh, God, I don't know.
That's a decision somebody's going to have to make probably in the next 10 minutes.
Everybody just left the room.
The chaos within air traffic control and the US air defenses went from top to bottom. But the Commission found no evidence of a stand-down order. However, by investigating the questions asked by the conspiracy theorists, the Commission exposed something the politicians would have preferred to remain secret. In the years after the end of the Cold War, the air defenses guarding America's capital and financial center had been dismantled.
There was a great feeling when the Berlin Wall fell and the Cold War was over that there would be a great peace dividend. So the very existence of the North Atlantic Air Defense Command was called into question, because where would the threat come from? No one thought, as they were struggling in the Pentagon to keep some semblance of air defense, to justify it on the basis of kamikaze-type threats within the United States. It was outward looking, not looking in to deal with a threat that was already in the United States. The system had been turned off, and only a very few bases with a very few airplanes left on standby to do this mission. There was no chance that any of those aircraft could have been shot down.
This is America, the most advanced military, technologically capable country in the world. And it is just impossible to believe that they could have been that incompetent.
Neil Mariani's widow is also not convinced.
Ellen Mariani is not going to accept this. Until we get justice and our day in court, it's not over.
We have not been told the truth. We really believe that this government was involved in this complicity of 9/11, and we're going to prove it.
My government has abandoned me. They've got blood on their hands.
In part 2, we examine the claims that there's physical proof the US government murdered its own citizens. "9/11 was the largest single terrorist atrocity in history. 3 years on, many Americans believe that the victims and their families were pawns in a US government conspiracy.
This is a box that has some mementos from September 11th associated with my brother. It says, Captain Charles F. Burlingame III, American Patriot, September 11th, 2001. He loved airplanes, and it's all he ever wanted to do. He never would say, I'm going to work. He would always say, I'm going flying. This photograph is of Chick in the cockpit of a 757. This is exactly the same type of cockpit that he was in on the day that he was killed. This is how Chick would have looked on a normal day. He would have been very happy to see someone walking into his cockpit, including the young man who would eventually pilot it into the Pentagon. This is how he should have looked when Hani Hanjour came through that door. And of course we know that's not how he looked. The first notice that I received that day was a phone call saying, probably the same phone call that millions of people received that day, go look at television. I remember thinking, those poor pilots. It was the first thing I thought when I saw that. Oh, the poor pilots.
As she grieved, American Airlines Flight 77, piloted by her brother, was overrun by hijackers and turned towards the Pentagon. But a widely held conspiracy theory, particularly in France, says that none of this happened.
The story is that this Boeing 757 took a very complicated spiral downward turn and rammed into the west wing of the Pentagon. That is the official account. There are many reasons to suspect that that story is untrue.
The alternative version is that the Pentagon was hit not by Flight 77, but by a missile fired on US orders. The passengers and crew were actually spirited away to a secret life with new identities. The conspiracy theory has flourished because the only photographic record of the impact is this time-lapse footage from a security camera. Leaked on the internet, it failed to capture what hit the building.
If the Pentagon had been hit by a Boeing 757 going 200 to 400 miles an hour, it would have created tremendous damage because the Boeing 757 has a wingspan of about 125 feet. It has a tail that makes it at least 40 feet high. And yet, photographs show the hole in the west wing was no more than 18 feet in diameter. So this suggests that whatever it was that hit the Pentagon was something much smaller. Whether it's a missile or a small airplane is a secondary matter.
There was very little wreckage, and it wasn't long before internet sites were suggesting that what there was had been planted.
All the physical evidence with regard to the Pentagon suggests that it was not a Boeing 757. There is not one piece of physical evidence that supports the official account.
Damning evidence, if only it were correct. Joel Zuckerman, an editor with USA Today, was driving to work that morning.
This is the 11th of September. Good morning, I'm at your day. Sunshine, beautiful blue sky.
One of the most stark things about that day is what a beautiful morning it was. Not a cloud in the sky. I was listening to the accounts of the World Trade Center attack on the radio.
A huge hole in one side of a World Trade Center tower.
But it didn't really dawn on me that Washington might be next. I remember hearing it before I saw anything. It was this huge roar of a jet. I looked up, and directly in my field of vision, I saw an airliner maybe 10 to 20 feet off the ground. I remember seeing the silver paint job with the familiar red, white, and blue paint across the windows of an American Airlines jetliner. It did not veer off course. It did not change direction. It went directly into the wall. There was a great explosion and just fire, just bright white and yellow fire.
Joel Zuckerman was just one of hundreds of eyewitnesses to the impact of Flight 77.
I saw pieces of scrap metal, you know, maybe long pieces, a couple of yards long, but not huge chunks of an airplane. I mean, everything went right to that wall and just seemed to be consumed into the wall.
Flight 77 hit at almost 500 miles an hour. The wings, full of fuel, were crushed back against the fuselage. Air crash investigators say this explains the small hole and the inferno that meant only tiny pieces of the plane survived. No conspiracy after all.
I'm not an agent of the U.S. government. I have no axe to grind, but I will tell you this. There's no doubt at all it was an American Airlines passenger jet that hit the Pentagon that day.
Mark Farron was the first photographer on the scene.
I literally, backpack on my back, camera in hand, ran as fast as I could to where the explosion was, where all the smoke was. That's where I did all the photography. I started skirting the area to try to get around the security people to get some pictures of the damaged part of the building, of the smoke coming out, the fire trucks arriving. And that was when I noticed that large piece of silver wreckage. That was the only external piece from the airplane that I saw.
Mark Farron's photo started appearing on the internet, not as proof of a crash, but of a guilty government planting evidence.
You can put my name in Google and you're going to come up with all kinds of sites about Pentagon conspiracies. There weren't a cast of prop people moving things in and out. There were no trucks driving around throwing out wreckage. You know, I think there's an old saying, at least in America, that says if you're going to tell a lie, make it as wild as possible because people will probably believe it then.
It's very disturbing that so many people buy into that. I think that they really couldn't care less about my brother or any other people who died. They are props or mere players. Or in the case of some of these conspiracies, you know, part of the conspiracy themselves. You know, my brother is, you know, ex-Navy fighter pilot. You know, they picked him for this mission to, you know, pull off this deception, and he's off somewhere in a cabin in Montana, you know, unbeknownst to his own daughter and wife. You know, there's a dark side to some of these conspiracies that I think is very disturbing.
We know what hit the Pentagon. We have very hard evidence in what exactly happened, where we've reproduced the exact flight path and so forth. We have much of the material from the airplane that hit. So it was not a Martian flying saucer, and it was not a Russian cruise missile. It was Flight 77.
But there are yet more extraordinary claims, this time focusing on the sudden collapse of the towers. Some have suggested that conspirators in the US government who discovered Al-Qaeda's plans placed demolition charges in the buildings to ensure maximum loss of life.
I don't believe anybody believes that 19 Arab hijackers blew up the World Trade Center. If they were involved, they must have had help by members of the federal government and perhaps members of New York government. An inside job.
3 buildings in the World Trade Center complex collapsed. The 110-story Twin Towers were reduced to a 5-story mound of rubble.
Never before in history has a steel-framed high-rise building collapsed simply because of fire. On 9/11, by coincidence, 3 such buildings collapsed within 10 to 16 seconds. Almost free fall speed. In other words, if you had dropped a brick from the top of the World Trade Center, it would have taken about that time to hit the ground. If fire could even conceivably bring down steel-frame buildings, would bring them down very slowly. The steel would bend and fall this way and that way. It'd be a very slow process. The pictures that we see are consistent with what is called controlled demolition. When a company fills a building with explosives, times the explosives in just the right way to bring the building straight down into its own footprint. And that's what we see with all 3 buildings.
An extraordinary allegation, but it ignores the facts. The Twin Towers were designed in the 1960s to withstand an aircraft strike or a fire. 27 years later, both happened at once.
They got run into by an airplane flying with the throttle down, laden with fuel. Took an enormous physical hit, and then following that, a fire, both initially from the fuel, and then that fed everything that would burn inside of the building, and the combination brought down the buildings. There's no evidence that there was any bomb inside. In my view, that's a kind of crazy thought. The fires caused the collapse of columns inside of the services court. That started to fall, and then, of course, a huge amount of building above it. It just hammered down through the rest of the building. The families of those who lost friends and loved ones in the towers, they're looking for closure. They're not looking for bomb theories, and all of that just distracts and hurts. It doesn't do any good.
In Part 3, conspiracy theories that are harder to knock down, like the allegation that Israeli agents knew about 9/11 in advance. Many Jewish Americans died on September the 11th. But particularly in the Middle East, millions of people believe Israeli agents were involved in the attack. And they claim there is a basis for their suspicions. Moments after the planes hit the World Trade Center, eyewitnesses reported seeing a group of young men apparently celebrating.
I grabbed my binoculars and I'm trying, to look at the Twin Towers. But what caught my attention, down there, I see this van parked. And I see 3 guys on top of the van. They seemed to be taking a movie, and I could see that they were like happy. You know, they're laughing. They didn't look shocked to me.
This part of New Jersey has a large Muslim community. It would turn out that 3 of the 9/11 hijackers had lived there. A major terrorist manhunt began, and just 6 hours after the attack, the van was stopped at a roadblock by patrolman Scott DiCarlo.
We were asked to detain the van and the passengers. They were just removed from the vehicle, patted down for safety precaution, and detained.
911 call at 410 Park.
I think once the FBI arrived, one of them stated that they were on our side. So there's something to that effect. The mood was confusion. As people were driving by, they were screaming all sorts of excerpts. Profanity, things to that effect. Nothing that I'd care to repeat.
3-1 day, they're in service.
Over 2 months of interrogation began. The FBI discovered the men weren't from Al-Qaeda. They were Israelis. An enduring conspiracy theory began, that they were Israeli field agents who'd uncovered the 9/11 plot in advance. Israel had deliberately failed to warn the US authorities because it wanted to ensure that American public opinion was hostile to the Arab world. Channel 4 traveled to Israel and spoke to 3 of the 5 men arrested that day to hear their side of the story.
One of the neighbors gave a call to the feds and tell there is a white van with 5 Arab people. As you see, I'm blonde, blue eyes. And he told there is a bomb in a white van. He gave the number, 5 Arab people, and they're on the way to Manhattan to make a suicide.
I was the driver. The policeman took his gun and put it in my head.
Where are the bombs? Where did you want to do the suicide? And I don't know nothing about what you say.
But I told them that I'm just a tourist from Israel, I'm Jewish. And he told me, don't talk, if you talk I'm gonna shoot you.
People were spitting on us from the street. They are passing with the cars and spit on us. Because they thought that we are the Arabs. They was looking for someone to blame.
A passerby took these photos of the police searching the van. 5 men were inside it. Some had dual nationalities and were carrying more than 1 passport. Others had flight tickets to leave the US within days. Fearing robbery, one had over $4,000 hidden in a sock.
They were ripping things, they took the camera, they were screaming at us all that time. Put your head into the ground or we were gonna shoot you.
They told interrogators they were working for Urban Moving, a shipping and storage firm run by an Israeli businessman who often employed Israeli students without work permits. The men say there was an innocent explanation for what was found in the van and their behavior on 9/11. They were, they say, simply on a working holiday.
We heard in the news that one of the plane was crashing down the buildings, and we thought it was an accident at the beginning. So we went up to the roof of Urban Moving, and we saw the building burning.
There is a better view from a building in Jersey that is up a hill, a straight line to the World Trade Center. We decided to go up there. It's like 2-3 minutes from the office. Stand over there and take some pictures. Everyone wants a picture like this in his camera.
Their boss at Urban Moving, Dominic Suter, was questioned by the FBI, but then disappeared back to Israel. It left lots of unanswered questions and fueled suspicion about the 5 men. Investigators seized the firm's computers, and the investigation took on a new urgency with multiple lie detector tests.
They continued to ask, did you know the terrorists? Did you know where they flew from? Did you know what they were supposed to do? The answer all the time is no, I don't know even what you talk about.
The FBI wasn't satisfied. Channel 4 has learnt from intelligence sources that some of the men's names were already known to American counterintelligence. Paul Kurtzberg admitted serving in an Israeli army anti-terrorist unit. He refused to take a lie detector test for 10 weeks.
I was serving in a special unit in the army, and It's not a big secret or something like that. But there are things that I have to keep to myself as loyal to my country.
The story that the feds build is a very good story. When you hear their story, you start even to believe it inside. Okay, maybe I'm a spy. I'm sure that I'm not, but the story is so good, so maybe I am.
Yuval Aviv is a counter-terrorism advisor to the US Congress, but was once a spy for Israel's secret service Mossad. He says Urban Moving was a front company for Israeli intelligence, and that some of its workers were spying illegally in the US.
Israel has engaged in intelligence gathering in friendly countries. Some of it is done with permission, and some of it probably has been done without permission in areas that is vital to Israeli interest, where large Arab communities operate and live, where there's a lot of fundraising for terrorist activities in the Middle East. That's the old undercover. This is the old way of gathering intelligence, which America has not used. If a decision is being made to put a bomb under a building during and after a prayer on a Friday night in a mosque, you have to be in the mosque. You will not be able to do it from a satellite.
Sources close to Israeli intelligence have told Channel 4 that Urban Moving produced no information that could have prevented 9/11. But whatever the truth of the conspiracy story, it's flushed out the possibility that Israel spies on America, its closest ally, an espionage tactic that both governments would prefer kept secret.
There's certain type of information that and methods of collections that you don't want to share with the local host country. Systems that you use, contacts that you make, undercover operations that you penetrating other terrorist networks. Those types of information you don't share with anybody.
The Urban Moving 5 were eventually deported to Israel for visa violations. Channel 4 understands, from sources close to US intelligence, that a condition of their release was that Israel promised not to spy in the US without permission. Then, as now, the Israeli government publicly denies it spies in the US. Immediately after 9/11, as America grieved, another of their allies stood accused of conspiracy. The allegation is that Saudi Arabia also stood to gain from this, because America would then target the Islamic fundamentalists who want to overthrow the Saudi royal family. Many in the Middle East now believe this conspiracy. It gained momentum because even as a global manhunt began for the terrorist leader, 24 of his family were spirited out of the US, and by the very authorities who declared him public enemy #1.
Immediately after 9/11, American skies were as empty as they had been in the days of the Wright brothers 100 years earlier when the first planes began to fly. On September 13th, private aviation was still banned. Yet the first flight of which I'm aware got up with 3 Saudis on it. And this was the beginning of an operation to evacuate more than 140 Saudis.
7 charter flights crisscrossed America, collecting high-ranking Saudis. The evacuees included Osama bin Laden's half-brother Khalil, pictured here boarding a plane in Florida. When airport staff heard the name bin Laden, they informed the White House. They were told the airlift had full approval.
15 out of 19 of the hijackers were Saudi. Osama bin Laden was Saudi. And Al-Qaeda, its formation, its infrastructure, its funding, has largely been Saudi. Some of them should have been detained as material witnesses. They should have been questioned under very rigorous circumstances. Even the most commonplace murder investigation, you would expect people to be taken down, give formal statements. Here you have the murder of 3,000 people, and that did not take place.
On the 20th of September, the bin Ladens left America from the same Boston airport where 10 of the hijackers began their deadly mission. It didn't seem to fit with the official line.
Make no mistake, the United States will hunt down and punish those responsible for these cowardly acts.
The American administration under President Bush didn't want the thorough investigation. They never did from the word go. And the first thing is to hush up by removing all of those who might provide relevant information.
The 9/11 Commission has given the flights a clean bill of health, but is resigned to the fact that this strange episode now has a life of its own.
The Saudi flights did not take off until all the airports were opened. They all were authorized. Most of the people were interviewed. They were seen to be of no interest. None of them were on any of the watch lists or had any known terrorist connections. Since then, we on our own in the Commission examined again the lists and matched them up against the latest watch lists. And we have some fairly substantial additional intelligence now since the Iraq War of al-Qaeda members, affiliates, sympathizers, and so forth in the world, and none of them match up.
The rules may have been followed, but the conspiracy allegation has encouraged scrutiny of the relationship between the Bush dynasty and the House of Saud. At its heart is the royal spokesman who arranged the flights, Prince Bandar bin Sultan bin Abdul Aziz Al Saud.
The government and the people of Saudi Arabia refuse to have any person affiliated with terrorism to be connected to our country.
Prince Bandar, who of course is the Saudi ambassador to the United States, was very, very close friends with George Bush Sr., with the president's father.
His Majesty, how grateful we are.
He's had more access to the highest levels of government, I believe, than any foreign leader, period, full stop, Tony Blair, Valerie Putin, whomever.
Craig Unger is a respected investigative journalist and author. After 9/11, he exposed the remarkable closeness between the Bush family and the House of Saud.
What is completely unprecedented is this relationship between the White House and another foreign power. I traced a total of $1.4 billion in investments and contracts going from the Royal House of Saud and their allies to oil companies in which the Bushes and their allies have very prominent positions. And I think one of the fundamental rules in business is you sort of don't bite the hand that feeds you. I think it created a very lax atmosphere, and they regarded them as old friends who they wouldn't offend by asking the tough questions.
This revelation, perhaps more than any other post 9/11, has damaged President Bush's personal standing. In Part 4, the most disturbing of all the 9/11 conspiracy theories, that al-Qaeda may have used the attacks themselves to raise money for the next wave of killing. Last month, security on Wall Street reached an all-time high. The US economy is now widely believed to be the terrorists' #1 target. And rumors persist that 9/11 concealed an insider trading conspiracy that meant al-Qaeda made millions from the attacks. Wall Street analyst Phil Erlinger was the first to spot the suspicious trades.
What I see is prior knowledge. You can call it conspiracy. It's my opinion that somebody knew ahead of time that 9/11 was going to happen, and they made bets to take advantage of it. And these bets weren't just normal run-of-the-day bets. They were far in excess of what we would call normal activity.
The trades center on the 2 airlines that lost planes in the 9/11 attack.
This is a chart of United Airlines. We start in 2000, we end in 2002, and here you can see the 9/11 event as the stock gapped down a week and a half later. The line below here shows the amount of short selling that occurs in United Airlines stock price. Traders betting that the price of the stock will decline. This level here, right before the 9/11 event, represented 10 times the normal trading of the stock on an average daily basis. The level of betting that the stock would go down was greater than at any time prior or any time since. Somebody here made a tremendous amount of money. I want to know who that person is.
The FBI and the Commission investigated, and concluded the suspicious market activity was linked to a pre-9/11 slump in the airline industry.
We looked at every trade. There was short selling, as there always is every day. We ran every one of those trades to ground, and there was no connection with any Al-Qaeda supporters or personnel.
The profiteers were never named. But in Israel, analysts at the country's top think tank on counterterrorism are skeptical about the findings.
We're talking something on the order of $10 million, $15 million. Now, $10 to $15 million is basically yacht upgrade money for major Wall Street players. However, you have to put this in the context not of Wall Street professional stock market investors, but rather of terrorists. 9/11 cost something on the order of $500,000 to carry out. So $10 million is a very significant amount of money to Al-Qaeda.
Whatever the truth, the conspiracy theory has thrown up a chilling prediction. In future, terrorism could be self-financing through complex market trades that would be impossible to track.
There are other trades that might be much harder to detect a problem, for example, on things like the oil market. So the potential size of this could be $100 million or more. We know for a fact that the terrorists look at websites of counter-terrorist research institutes. We've seen graphics that our webmaster put up on our website on one day, within a couple of days appear on Hezbollah or Hamas or Al-Qaeda websites. What that means is that whether the insider trading really happened before 9/11 or not, now the idea is out there, and if the terrorists think it's as good an idea as I think it is, they'll try it the next time.
The internet is the perfect medium for attention-seeking conspiracy theories. Those that cluster around 9/11 gain ground by tapping into the huge loss of trust between politicians and the people. The battle for the hearts and minds of a skeptical public means that every conspiracy theory, however outlandish, must now be fought.
You have to depend on the credibility of our story to preempt all of the infinite number of myths that could be spun out of what happened. We know what happened. There are no big question marks. There are no huge missing links. Certainly, governments put events, cataclysmic or otherwise, into a context that supports what they want to do. That's a long way from saying that they therefore wished the event to happen or helped to perpetrate it.
Most 9/11 conspiracy theories rely on fuzzy logic, but have an uncanny knack of asking the right questions. Without them, many of the motives and actions of our leaders would remain secret.
You can talk to the producer and director Polly Morland about that programme right now at channel4.com/talk. Well, next on 4, a change from the advertised film. Billy Crystal stars in City Slickers.